A little bit more sweet draft action here at GP Atlanta. Hello and welcome to this round 11 here at GP Atlanta. The number of undefeated players is dwindling, and Geddes Cooper and Cash Turner, they are in the privileged position to currently have a 0 next to the loss column on their weekend thus far. I know Geddes Cooper had an absolutely spectacular seal deck yesterday. You can read about that on Daily MTG on our coverage over on the text side of things. It looks like both these players kicking off with red decks. We'll see whether or not they're both red-black, but Cash Turner has already shown his true colors. Whether or not Geddes is on the same sort of thing, we'll see soon enough.
Yep, Cash Turner is from San Jose, California. Prepped for this a lot with NorCal drafters. And he went deep in Grand Prix Vegas number 2. So this is not the first time he's doing well at a big stage.
And a Quicksmith Genius, his first play, facing off against a Thriving Rhino from Geddes Cooper. So we're not exactly the same color combinations. Red-green has a little bit more that it can do with some of the +1/+1 counters and energy and so on. Red-black, it's the aggressive deck, and first clue with that Quicksmith Genius, it wants some artifacts.
Yep, yeah, a good explanation of what both of these color combinations excel at. This is a logical no-block by Geddes Cooper. He has the ability to turn his Thriving Rhino into a 3/4 on the next attack, which is, well, bigger than the Quicksmith Genius. Therefore, well, it's not a good trade to make. He is getting a little bit behind in the damage race because Cash had the first attack, but still so far so good. Ooh, Spontaneous Artist, another energy, and he has the opportunity to give it haste if he so pleases. Looks like that's indeed what he's doing. Well, all of a sudden, attack for 6.
Spontaneous Artist is a card that I like a lot as a way of spending energy. It obviously doesn't generate a huge amount of it. Welding Sparks, they're dealing with the Thriving Rhino. But now, if Geddes Cooper has ways of generating more energy, he can basically give his team haste from now on. Decoction Module alongside Spontaneous Artist is one of my favorite little synergies. From now on, every time you play a creature, you get an energy. You can spend that energy, use it to attack with that creature straight away, and just get the beat on. But for now, the beat is coming from Cash Turner's drum, getting another hit in there.
There was kind of a peculiar turn there by Geddes and Cash. It looked like Geddes went to like trigger the Rhino, wanting to put energy counters on it, given that he currently has no energy remaining. And then Cash responded with a Welding Sparks, dealing 3 damage to it. And I believe the situation with Thriving Rhino, at least the trigger, is that you choose upon resolution whether or not to pay 2 energy to put a +1/+1 counter on it. I think it is legal to pay 2 energy even when the Rhino is no longer on the battlefield. But if my understanding is correct, that was not the best line for Geddes there, effectively losing energy for no benefit.
And built to smash, meaning that the attacks just keep on coming from Cash Turner here. He's a little bit short on lands compared to the 6 lands already in play for Geddes Cooper, but it doesn't seem to matter too much. Dund Operative there coming down to join his creature there in play. So he's the one that's getting the attacks in. He's not got the artifacts going that really are a hallmark of red-black, but he has got the damage.
Oh yeah. Geddes is squarely behind now. Fateful Showdown. So he has 4 cards in hand, meaning he can shoot 4 damage to a target he likes. And he also cashes in 3 lands and a Hunt a week without any creatures for 4 new cards. That's a pretty good deal at this stage of the game.
I must admit, Fateful Showdown is one of the cards that I've had a little bit of trouble evaluating. Obviously, you'll have occasions that you're trading in a bunch of lands for something far better. The thing that I think I'd miss to start with is that you can send that damage to the face, and it's one of the few ways to do that in the format.
Yeah, apart from Chandra's Pyrohelix and 1 or 2 other cards, there are almost no ways to deal direct damage to players.
Eager Construct there coming down, letting both players scry.
Yep. Ooh, Furious Reprisal, a 2-for-1, clearing the board, and now Geddes is getting back.
But a fourth land now for Cash Turner, so that turns on potentially a few more things. And Spontaneous Artist on the other side of things, that energy didn't even really have time to come in play before it was spent on.
Tapped and attacking into the red zone. The best way to play Spontaneous Artist.
Riparian Tiger coming along, more energy available for Geddes Cooper.
And there's also a good blocker for the Spontaneous Artist. Creature sizes, once you get to 4 drops and 5 drops, are humongous in this format. And Riparian Tiger is now towering over the battlefield. Geddes probably doesn't have the luxury to attack with it and use the trigger to make it even bigger, because he's at 8 life. This is way lower than 17, and he likely needs the Tiger to block both of Cash's 3/3 creatures.
Yeah, Brazen Scourge unable to attack there in the face of the Tiger. But it's another 3/3 on the board.
Chandra's mom.
Pia Nala. Now this is a rare with a lot of abilities. First of which you see there, the Thopter token coming in play alongside Pia. You can sacrifice an artifact to make one of your creatures a little bit trickier to block. And then you can pump your artifacts with Pia as well. It costs a relatively hefty amount of mana, but you know what? Geddes has got a relatively hefty amount of lands in play, so he has got a bit of a route to victory in the air now. Obviously, the more artifacts you've got, the more powerful that ability gets, just because it gives you a bit of flexibility. There we see it. 1 and a red to pump one of your artifact creatures, and you can pay 1 and sacrifice an artifact to make a creature unable to block.
Yeah, this card does a lot, and it's one of the better rares in the format, actually. I would be very happy to first pick this out of any booster when I start a draft, or to just open it when I am already solidly in red.
Yeah, Pia's like a super fabricate creature. Doesn't ever get a +1/+1 counter, but does give that servo an upgrade and into a Thopter that flies.
Renegade Tactics, mostly to just draw a card there for Geddes. The no blocking clause is probably not all that relevant at this point. Meanwhile, the Dunt Operative, it's just a 2/2 on Cash's side. There's no artifact to give it +1/+0 or that touch. And now the Tiger is getting in. This likely signals another blocker from Geddes, otherwise it's a pretty dangerous attack. Well, there's a Thriving Grubs. That can block.
It can block, and also the energy it provides will be merrily chomped up by that Tiger on a second attack next turn. Cash Turner is going to be taking some pretty big chunks of damage from that Tiger at some point. I mean, if he can find an artifact, of course, his Dund Operative gets a lot more exciting and gain Death Touch, which means that while there might be some trample damage coming through, at least he can trade with it.
It's still somewhat of an aggressive attack by Geddes, because he doesn't have amazing blocks here. Like he can, for instance, block the Thriving Grubs on the Dund Operative, and then maybe double block a Brazen Scourge with PNLR and the token. He could also just try to take more damage, or perhaps he has an instant speed removal spell or a combat trick to get ahead in this combat. But the fact that Riparian Tiger is tapped does mean that finding blocks is a bit more difficult at this point. At the same time, Cash also had to worry about a deadly attack on the swing back. Right? If Cash attacks with all of his creatures and has no follow-up, and Geddes has some kind of instant, like a combat trick or a removal spell, then there is easily a possibility that Cash will lose on the swing back. That said, Cash has to try something, and assuming that he at least has some follow-up after combat, and he certainly has lots of non-land cards in hand, seems like a fine play to go in here. Looking at Geddes' hand, he has Appetite for the Unnatural. That's a naturalized effect that doesn't really do anything at this point, but I believe there's also Welding Sparks. That's a good instant speed removal spell here.
Whole host of blocks here from Geddes. He wants to make sure that he can remove as many creatures from the battlefield here, because that Tiger represents easily the largest threat.
Yeah, well, he's also at 8. He can't really take that much damage. Has to make some blocks.
Now, what's the follow-up from Cash here? Bastion Mastodon immediately getting chomped up by that hungry monkey.
Geddes could not be happier to see that artifact creature coming down. Finally, a target for the Appetite for the Unnatural, and it also gains him to life. That's pretty huge.
Yeah, the Mastodon, it's got a good set of stats that means that even though the white activation cost isn't something that Cash Turner can pay, still makes the cut in his list.
Yep, yeah, 4, 5 for 5 are reasonable stats. Not great, but playable. But the fact that it's an artifact turns on some of his cards, which is definitely relevant.
So Ballista Charger there, the play for Geddes after he's made his attacks. Can't crew it just yet, but if there's a nicely sized creature off the top, or indeed in his hand for next turn, it represents a pretty sizable threat. 6/6 attacking in, gets to ping something on the way also.
And note that Geddes does not have any energy remaining, so he may not be able to pump the Tiger on the next turn. That said, if Geddes has a creature, or perhaps two, to crew up the Ballista Charger, Geddes would have the option of attacking with both of his creatures, pinging 1 damage to Cash, and then he has 2 lethal attackers. So if Cash wants to play around that and is not able to win the game on this turn, he will have to find at least 2 blockers. And a double chump is not an appealing proposition.
Cash doing the math here. And with so much mana open, there's a lot of cards for Geddes to worry about. The Scourge comes in.
Oh wow, just the attack and pass the turn. Well, this might mean that Cash has Tidy Conclusion in hand, an instant speed removal spell for, say, the Ballista Charger in case it gets crewed up. He might also hope that Geddes has nothing in hand, but that's unlikely. But yeah, if you have Tidy Conclusions and want to play that, because that is what 5 open mana for a red-black deck signals, then attacking with the Scourge definitely makes a lot of sense.
So Hunt the Weak just resolving there. And there is the Tidy Conclusion.
Yeah, interesting that Cash did not want to play it in response to the Hunt the Weak. What he may have been scared of was, well, if I do that, then Geddes can just play some creature like a 3/2 for 3, crew up the Ballista Charger, and I lose on that very turn. At the same time, by trying to play around that, he did lose his Brazen Scourge in the process to Hunt the Weak.
Another Bastion Mastodon. All right, we got plays.
Well,
Can Geddes just find a 3-power creature?
Yep, he needs crew 3. If he has that, then he's in a great spot. Cash will have to chump block the Ballista Charger. If he does not, if he has nothing, then he might even lose to the Bastion Mastodon on the next attack because he's at 4. And that'll do it. Geddes had nothing.
So the big vehicle unable to make too much of an impact there in that game 1 between Cash Turner and Geddes Cooper. Cooper, a player that's actually been out of the game for a little while. He's a long-time South Florida player who used to be very active on the JSS, the Junior Super Series back in the day. But he came back to the game about 5 months ago at some fairly consistent prodding from Ben Stark. And while he didn't feel like he was playing particularly seriously prior to coming to this GP, I think he's got the bug again. He's back in.
When you're 10-0 sitting on top of the standings, it must feel good.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like it's obvious that sort of he's worked with Ben Stark quite a bit. Even just between rounds, he was sort of coming up to Ben and saying, "I had this difficult pick. I went this way. Which way would you have gone?" I'm like constantly trying to improve his game, improve his choices after each game. We're going to get a chance to look in on Chris Fennell, another of our undefeated players, against Quinn Griffin. Chris down on life here, but with a few nice ones in the air.
Yeah, there's Aerial Responder that can gain him some life, potentially. The Vampire Lighthawk, as we like to call it. 2/3 flying, lifelink, vigilance. There's also a Longfin Sky Whale, which is good when you're winning the damage race, and not so much when you're at 4 life and there are no creatures with flying on the other side of the table that you can block. But let's see. There's now a 3-power Aerial Responder.
Yeah,
Which could easily block, say, the Restoration Gearsmith if Quinn would attack with all of his creatures. And there's a 0/1 Rappencroft Enthusiast. Tidy Conclusion.
Yep. With that, Chris Fennell tidies up his board. He recognises that this game's over. So Quinn Griffin a game up there in that one. Our main match still sideboarding. Cash Turner, slightly unusual name. His first name is actually given to him by his father, who was a famous pool player, and he clearly appreciated the cash and decided that, one way of showing that.
Yeah, his deck, I'm looking over his list here, looks pretty good to me, actually. Some cards that we haven't seen from his deck in the previous game yet is a Noxious Gearhulk. That's one of the best cards to have or to open in this format. And apart from that, it's a bunch of good red and black creatures, some of which work with artifacts such as Dund Operative. But the main standout of his deck is an excellent suite of removal spells. He has 2 copies of Tidy Conclusion, 2 copies of Welding Sparks, and an Unlicensed Disintegration, as well as a Harness Lightning. So this will easily allow him to deal with any problematic permanents that opponents may put out. And then, well, his solid synergistic creatures, which get better with artifacts, can win the game. This just looks like a perfectly solid list to me. He also has 2 Bastion Mastodon in the 5-drop slot that we talked about. It's fine. He's not playing a Plains for it, even though, well, he could. But I like just adding more swamps and mountains.
So here we see a turn 1 discard spell, not something you necessarily see all too often from main decks in this format.
Harsh Scrutiny. It's like a duress for creatures with a free scry attached.
But I guess that once you realize that your opponent is playing with a pretty happy amount of creatures, it potentially does make sense to bring in, and being able to take a Voltaic Brawler here, kind of a nice one. But no, he's carefully figuring out what his play is. Basically, he's trying to plan out, I guess, what Geddes Cooper's going to do in the next few turns.
Yeah, obviously it depends on your hand, but when I play these discard effects, I can go in like 2 directions. Either take the best card in my opponent's hand, which is in this case a Voltaic Brawler, that's just such an efficient creature, or try to punch a hole in their mana curve or game plan, which would favor taking the Riparian Tiger. Cash Turner goes for the best card in Voltaic Brawler. He won't be able to mess up Geddes' mana curve in that way, although it's possible that Geddes won't have a 3-drop after taking it. But it definitely means that Cash won't have to worry about Voltaic Brawler anymore.
Yeah, the Brawler being able to just attack as a 4/3 Trampler, I mean, that's just an insane, crazy rate on a 2-drop.
Absolutely. Inventor's Goggles, meanwhile, it's an okay card. It definitely helps turn on creatures like Dund Operative to add an artifact to the board. Artificers, well, it includes the Quicksmith Genius, for instance. Pretty much all the Fabricate creatures and all the Artifact Matters creatures, such as Quicksmith Genius, are Artificers. So that will help beef it up. It's now a 4/4, capable of blocking the thriving grubs, even if the grubs grows up to a 3/2.
So Sage of Shayla's Claim here, meaning there's lots of energy available for Geddes Cooper, and we know, of course, that there's a Riparian Tiger in the future as well. Thriving Grubs is unlikely to eat too much energy just yet, as it would basically die in spite of doing so.
Yep. So the cards that Cash still knows from Geddes' hand from the Harsh Scrutiny earlier are the Riparian Tiger as well as the Welding Sparks. All the other cards are unknown to him.
Subtle Strike there, dealing with the Thriving Grubs, making blocking kind of tricky for Geddes. And a nice follow-up in Dund Operative. There is an artifact in play in those Inventor's Goggles, so it will be a 3/2 with Death Touch.
Yep. Now Geddes does have a good blocker for that in the form of the Sage of Shayla's Claim, but Cash could easily move over the Inventor's Goggles from his big Gearsmith to the Dund Operative and then attack with both, in which case Geddes won't have great blocks.
Brazen Scourge looks to be the play here. Just more aggressive attackers here, and this is really putting pressure on what Geddes is looking to do.
Yep, well, he knows that Geddes has Welding Sparks in hand, which could easily be cast on, say, well, could be cast on the Brazen Scourge, but Geddes is more scared of the Restoration Gearsmith and goes for a 2-for-1 trade.
Plenty of energy here for this Riparian Tiger, but as Cash Turner is able to go a little bit wide, Well,
That'll do it.
yeah.
Yep,
Unlicensed Disintegration kills off the Tiger, deals 3 extra damage because the Inventor's Goggles are in play. That would put Geddes Cooper to 6, and well, that's enough that Cash Turner can simply swing in and keep the wins coming. 2-0 to Cash Turner, very straightforward, very powerful looking red-black aggro deck.
That was fast, yeah. I mean,
11-0.
Unlicensed Disintegration is definitely one of the better gold uncommons in Kaladesh, and it fits so well in the red-black strategy. It's aggressive. Cash already got Geddes down to a low life total early, and then it just clears the biggest creature, deals 3 more damage, swing in for a lot. His deck was performing excellently.
So here we see whether or not Chris Fennell, one of our other 10-0 players, can bounce back after a rough game 1. He's in Jeskai colors right now with islands, plains, and a mountain in play, but just an Aviary Mechanic.
Yeah, it looks like he hasn't really done much so far. This is turn 6, and the only creature, well, at the start of his turn on the battlefield was an Aviary Mechanic. Now, sure, there's a Fairgrounds Warden. That's okay, but not really the heavy hitter that you would expect or need on turn 6. That said, Quinn also hasn't had the most aggressive of starts. He's playing white-black, which is often a bit more of a slow, controlling deck, and underhanded designs in particular works well in it. It's kind of a slow bleed. Every artifact that enters the battlefield for you will allow you to drain the opponent for 1 mana. But there is Gonti. Let's check out the top 4.
Yeah, Gonti, Lord of Luxury. Quinn's going to be the one that gets to look at these top 4. Chris does not get to see them.
Yeah.
And one of those 4 is going to get exiled face down, and Quinn can cast that anytime that he would be able to cast it as if it was in his hand, but he can use mana of any color to do so.
Yep.
And that card, even if once it's exiled, even if Gonti gets killed off, I mean, Gonti's a 2/3 death touch, so sooner or later he may get stuck in combat, he may die. The card that's exiled, you can just still cast it. It's just sat there ready to go as and when you need.
Exactly, it's not tied to Gonti. Gonti by itself is a pretty solid card. I would pick it quite highly. There are maybe some uncommons that are slightly better than it, but I'm fairly confident that Gonti is better than all the commons, at least. It's just a lot of value. Even a 2/3 death touch for 4 mana wouldn't be absolutely terrible, but just getting a free card, and not just any free card, the best card from the top 4 of your opponent's deck, that is definitely pretty good.
Well, Cloudblazer gets the top 2 from Chris Fennell's deck, in addition to a couple of life for him and a 2/2 flyer. One of the better uncommons in the set. Obviously, a little tricky on mana sometimes, but worth it.
And it's at its best in blue-white. There are lots of effects in blue and white that allow you to bounce or blink certain cards, like Ether Trade Winds or Acrobatic Maneuver, making Cloudblazer very well positioned in that blue-white deck. But it wasn't for long. Underhanded designs, besides draining, also has the ability of killing opposing creatures, as long as you have 2 or more artifacts in play, which Quinn Griffin certainly had.
Yeah, he chooses to sacrifice the underhanded design, so he's not going to be able to drain anymore, but worth it to get rid of the 2/2 flyer, and Gonti getting stuck in here.
Yeah, Chris would have to double block in order to take it down, and then due to that touch he loses both of his blockers. That doesn't seem like an appealing proposition. And next turn Chris could, for instance, if he so desires, equip the Inventor's Goggles to, say, Aviary Mechanic, so that he has a 3/4 creature that can reasonably block Gonti by itself.
This black-white deck, it's not quick about the way it does things. That's not necessarily unusual for the black-white archetype, but it's got persistent sources of damage, and it's one of the colors that can actually do kind of cool things with vehicles.
Yeah, black-white has some effects like Restoration Gearsmith that can return vehicles back from the graveyard. There are also some creatures like Night Market Lookout that are nice to crew vehicles with. Lots of small synergies going around all around Kaladesh. Oh, now we get to see what it is.
Well,
Ooh.
If you're going to take one of the cards from your opponent's deck, a Torrential Gearhulk that you can cast for mana of any color is a pretty good choice.
Yes, it is.
Oh!
Wow, what a blowout.
Ether Trade Winds, bouncing a permanent control by each player. But they're both going to go to Chris Fennell's hand because he owns both of them.
Exactly. Wow.
And of course, he's now going to be able to cast that Torrential Gear Hulk at some point
To flash back to either trade wins.
to bounce his Torrential Gear Hulk again and bounce something else. I am excited.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that Gunty backfired big time.
That is insane. Chris Fennell has to be feeling pretty good about how that sequence of plays went. Meanwhile, Quinn Griffin, he's just sat there thinking,
But
I took my opponent's
I had
bomb.
a 5-6. What happened? Oh boy.
Turnabout is fair play. If you're going to steal my creature, I'm going to steal it right on back.
And he even got to bounce his Fairgrounds Warden as well, which I think had exiled a servo token before. So yeah, now he gets to exile another relevant card. Okay, another servo token, fine. But yeah, and oh, the value.
The suspicious, but ultimately not very suspicious, 6 mana left open by Chris Fennell here.
Yeah.
Hey, look who it is.
Ooh, this is a smart heads-up play. Quinn Griffin was planning to block the Aviary mechanic with a dead-touching Dund operative, but other trade wins bounces the only artifact that Quinn had, turning off the dead touch, giving Chris Fennell back the Fairgrounds Warden in case Quinn would make some threatening creature. Yeah, this looks like a surgical dismantling of Quinn Griffin's board position.
What a cool format we have, Frank Carsten.
Yes.
I'm loving this. Gonti, Lord of Luxury, getting stuck in. That not necessarily one you want to deal with a Fairgrounds Warden, because you don't necessarily want the coming into play trigger to happen yet again. But
yeah,
that's
a bit risky. Yeah. Torrential Gear Hulk is such a good card by itself. I mean, even 5/6 with a flashback would already be super powerful. But flash means that it's... I think it's actually the only flash creature in the entire format, making it kind of a unique effect that opponents will almost always just play into, and then you can easily set up a 2-for-1 or 3-for-1 with Torrential Gear Hulk. Unlikely to happen at this point when Quinn knows what's going on, but in general, I love this Torrential Gear Hulk. We'll always first pick it.
The Longfin Skywell there coming down for Chris Fennell. At this point, I don't think that he's as worried about not being able to block quite so much, because he can potentially race. Gearshift Ace coming down for Quinn Griffin.
Yeah, it's hard to raise the Longfin Skywhale. Sure, there's Gonti to block Torrential Gear Hulk, but yeah, Quinn cannot deal with all of Chris's creatures, not with his current board state, at least. Chris is like, should I attack with the Torrential Gear Hulk, trade for Gonti, or not? I mean, trading a 5/6 for a 2/3 doesn't seem that appealing to me, but on the other hand, if Chris doesn't attack with it, then, well, he gives Quinn the opportunity to block his Aviary mechanic and preserve his life total a bit more. Given that Chris is dealing a lot of damage in the air, the trade means that Quinn's life total will dwindle a bit more, and now Chris actually, well, he didn't go for the lethal potential on the next turn. 7 power in the air will also be good enough for him. But without any flying defense and without the capability of reasonably winning a damage race, Quinn is in a tough position.
Yeah, Chris Fennell has been doing good things with Artificers and Inventors Goggles all weekend long. He went 9-0 with a deck that was very, very heavy on Fabricate yesterday. And here his deck is not quite as Fabricate focused, but he still feels the Goggles are good enough.
Yep. Well, Essence Extraction taking down the Propeller Pioneer, giving Quinn also some life. That's definitely useful. But Quinn is still behind.
More big attacks from Chris Fennell. And Select for Inspection was the draw for Fennell. Obviously, that would have been lovely to draw while he still had the Gear Hulk in play. Attack with it. If there's a scary-looking block, bounce it again, and then you get the opportunity to bounce yet again with it.
Note also that Chris Fennell is playing it slowly. He still has his Fairgrounds Warden in hand that he's saving in case Quinn plays some kind of big flyer or bomb card. And I believe Chris also had Shrewd Negotiation in hand, the blue card that allows you to exchange control of 2 artifacts. He was also saving that just in case Quinn would play something more threatening. when you're ahead, you want to save your removal spells for what really matters.
I guess that might be the reason that he made a servo with his Propeller Pioneer rather than going for lethal in one turn. Not only did it mean that he was a little bit more protected against a removal spell, it meant that he had an artifact that he could trade if he so needed.
Yep. Yeah, in general, I've been making servos with fabricated creatures a bit more often than 50%. Not only because, as you mentioned, it helps against removal spells, but also there's so many cards in Kaladesh that care about artifacts, and well, servo tokens are certainly artifacts. So let's take a look at the deck list of the players as they are shuffling quickly with about 13 minutes remaining in the round. Yeah, Chris Van El's deck is just typical blue-white. 2 Inventor's Goggles, actually. So he does like that one quite a lot. It's fine to exchange with Shrewd Negotiation as well.
Quinn Griffin also has 2 copies of Inventor's Goggles. These guys pretty much scooped up the Inventor's Goggles to the table. And already kicking things off. We'll see where people want to begin here.
Well, that costs 3 mana.
Yeah, that's not going to work.
Awkward. Perhaps Quinn wants to play another card from his hand and just selected the wrong one. It's also possible that he actually thought that Renegade Freighter was 2 mana, but that is not the case.
Probably for the best that it's not the case, if
Yes.
we're honest. Prophetic Prism coming from Chris Van El. Draws a card. And Quinn's hit his second color of mana. Let's see what he's going to do with it. Hey, look. We knew about that one.
Yep.
Renegade Freighter. It's nothing to crew it just yet, but a powerful threat once it does get crewed.
It can finish games in short order. Hard to block. I mean, 5/4 trample on the offense, especially on turn 3. There are almost no 3 mana creatures that can deal with it, so you often have to line up double blocks. Yeah, that's not. That's also a bit risky against instant speed removal or bounce spells. Meanwhile, Chris Van El is not really doing much. Prophetic Prisms, sure, draw some cards. May turn on some Artifact Matters cards, and he does have Gear Seeker Serpents in his deck, and I believe he has one in hand, which may also explain all of these Inventor's Goggles in his list.
Kambal, Console of Innovation, Console of Allocation, could potentially be a bit of a problem for Chris Van El because his is a deck that has quite a lot of spells. Those Prophetic Prisms, they represent things that trigger Kambal, as does this Select for Inspection.
Now here, well, the Select for Inspection is definitely an awesome tempo play, trading 1 mana for 3 mana on Quinn's side. Looks like the players are discussing whether or not the Kambal trigger was missed or not. It triggers whenever an opponent plays a non-creature spell, I believe, and then drains them for 2. But you have to announce that when the card is being played. Given that Chris Van El was already scrying and Quinn didn't mention the trigger at that point, it looks like it is being counted as a missed trigger. And remember, this is a Grand Prix Day 2, so the rules are being adhered to fairly strictly.
Yeah, Quinn was possibly a little bit quick to pick up his freighter there, and ultimately that cost him. But is able to get a hit in here with Kambal. There's no blockers available to Van El, and there's the freighter again. Missing land drops, though, for Quinn Griffin. That could prove problematic.
Yeah, now Chris Van El does have enough artifacts to put down the Gear Seeker Serpent. And it's an excellent size if he wants to. No, he goes for Cloud Blazer instead. The benefit of Gear Seeker Serpent would have been that it would be able to block the Renegade Freighter profitably. On the other hand, it also exposes him to a removal spell. Cloud Blazer is also a sweet card to put down. Maybe later on the Gear Seeker Serpent is even cheaper if Chris has more artifacts.
Visionary Augmenter coming down, making a couple of servos for Quinn Griffin. And there's the crewing and a couple of creatures swinging in. Looks like Chris just taking that hit.
Yeah, he has a bit of a life buffer thanks to Cloud Blazer, but it's not like he has a ton of time. And even though he can attack for 5 in the air, that's nice. It could still be a pretty close damage race. And a damage raise it is. Chris is not playing defensively. He's not keeping his flyers back in order to perhaps block servo tokens or block Kambal or something like that. He is going on the offense.
And Avery Mechanic following up after the Serpent there, picking up a prophetic Prism. That play, yes, it plays into Kambal a little bit. Kambal will trigger when that Prophetic Prism gets recast, but it may be that Chris Fennell sees a future where the big legendary creature is not in play, at which point drawing a few extra cards doesn't hurt. Gear Shift Ace coming in for Quinn Griffin, uses that to crew his Express, and that means that it has first strike in addition to everything else, making it problematic to block.
Interesting. Well, it's problematic to block, but a 5/4 attacker would still be easily blocked by Gearseeker Serpent. Now, given that Quinn has 2 mana up, a white and a black, some cards that Chris has to worry about are Subtle Strike and Impeccable Timing. Subtle Strike +1/+1 counter and -1/-1. Impeccable Timing, 3 damage to an attacking or blocking creature. And this is exactly why Chris Fennell is not blocking the Renegade Freighter with his Gearseeker Serpent. He wants to play around those instant speed spells that I mentioned by blocking, say, a less threatening creature, so that his Gearseeker Serpent will survive and live through combat, even if Quinn had one of those instants.
I believe he actually did have Impeccable Timing as well. I'd be interested to know if you feel like Impeccable Timing drops in value a little bit once people get more familiar with the format. It seems pretty good on the face of things.
Yeah, well, it's always going to be a fine card to include in your deck. It's always going to be playable, but definitely early on in the format, when people may not be too familiar with what open white mana might mean, it's a bit more valuable because you can surprise people with a card that they hadn't thought of or internalized as being in the format yet.
Another Gearseeker Serpent available for Chris Fennell here. They certainly do look impressive against the size of creatures that are being deployed by Quinn Griffin, though I guess that the exact same situation could easily come up next turn of, does he want to block that Express? Sooner or later he's going to have to. He may have to live with losing a Serpent in order to get rid of the Freighter.
Well, that's looking ahead to the next attack, but Chris Fennell, like if Quinn has nothing, then Chris Fennell can just attack with all of his creatures and win. It would be lethal, but yeah, it is really dangerous. A Subtle Strike won't do it, because it would give -1/-1, and then it's still exactly 9 points of damage. But Impeccable Timing, well, if Chris goes for the aggressive line of attacking with all of his creatures, Impeccable Timing would take down Snare Topter, putting Quinn down to 2 life, and then Chris is in danger of dying on Quinn's next attack. At the same time, Chris also probably wants to make some attacks, at least put Quinn on a reasonable clock. He could kind of thread the line in between by attacking with the Gearseeker Serpent only, for example, not with any of his flyers that might die to Impeccable Timing, and passing the turn, still with the Gearseeker Serpent up. Alright, he goes all in, says, well, you have to have it here, the Impeccable Timing, and Quinn does. Now Chris still has Gearseeker Serpent and another Aviary Mechanic as blockers. So unless Quinn has some kind of removal spell for the Gearseeker Serpent, Chris would be able to survive the next attack. But if there is a removal spell for the 5/6, then there could be a big train, 5-power Trampler coming in, which might be lethal actually. And then Chris's relatively aggressive line might backfire. Yep, there is the removal spell, Tidy Conclusion. There's 5 power Word of Trample and 2 more. It's exactly lethal. Chris, he's mad at himself.
Yeah, there were a lot of different lines that he could have taken there, and it was just a matter of figuring out what he had to work against. Yeah, it's one that's going to be one that he's going to look at the playback on and work his way through different options he had available. By the looks of things, Quinn Griffin actually had even more removal available to him in subsequent turns. So it may be that Chris Fennell was actually in kind of a rough spot, no matter which way he sliced it.
Yeah, I would argue that Chris played too aggressively. If Chris had just attacked with the Gearseeker Serpent, keep his 2 flyers behind, he would have been able to survive this attack and still win on the next turn.
As it stands, though, Chris Fennell now at 10-1, as is Quinn Griffin. That is the end of our round 11 in terms of live matches, but do stay with us because we're going to get a chance to see a little bit more of Sam Black's draft, and that's going to be with Maria and Marshall.